My first question to you is, can you explain to our viewers a bit more about Atlantic Council and its mission in the world since it's founded?
Certainly. First of all, it's a pleasure to be back here in Bosnia, to be in Sarajevo. I've had the chance to come here many times with my jobs over the years, and I'm really pleased to be back with the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is here in Bosnia precisely because of its mission. We're committed to fostering transatlantic cooperation and to helping to advance the story of European integration. The Atlantic Council was founded by those people that came out of the Truman and Eisenhower administration who, when they were in government, they helped create NATO. They helped create, with their European peers, the precursor to the European Union, the UN system, IMF, World Bank. These are institutions that our founders were involved in conceptualizing and giving life to. Today, this world is under challenge. It's being challenged if we look east, if we look south. So the Atlantic Council is a foreign policy institute, organization, bipartisan, Democrats, Republicans, with their international partners that are committed to ensuring U.S. leadership in the world, working with our allies and partners to solve global challenges. And one of the biggest challenges we face is holding together this rules-based world order that our founders helped create. And what that means here in Bosnia is how you actually think about a future where Bosnia advances in the picture of a Europe whole and free rather than stagnates.
We are talking about Bosnia in NATO at the moment, and we have so many misconceptions about that road. Everybody thinks that we are going to get some sort of a wild card like on Olympic Games to go in NATO, but when you look from a position of Atlantic Council and United States, which is one of the leading members of NATO, what is that we need to achieve through reforms to become NATO member, as Montenegro is as of recent?
Exactly. So I've had the opportunity to work on almost every round of NATO enlargement, and we're really pleased to see the alliance opening its doors right now to Montenegro. It sends a very important signal, I think, through the region, that as you reform at home, our institutions stand prepared to welcome you. And even as the EU thinks about its future, the alliance has made a strong commitment to the open door policy, and we see that. I'm a strong advocate, a strong supporter of a Bosnia-Herzegovina whose future lies within the alliance, but I'm also concerned about the lack of progress towards that end. At the end of the day, NATO is something that's very simple. It's an international political military organization that fundamentally helped former adversaries become allies, to transform relationships. If you look at France and Germany, if you look at Western Europe, Eastern Europe, if you look at what NATO has done, it has taken those countries that had fought many wars, that had animosity towards each other, and bound them together into a collective defense organization to say that we stand by each other, that we will stand by each other to protect each other against common threats. And that no matter what that is, there's a sense of solidarity there. So that fundamental premise, I think, is one of the challenges here in Bosnia. We want to see Bosnia reformed domestically, whether it's rule of law or issues like that. But I think fundamentally this concept of former adversaries becoming allies, we want to see that not just in the context of the political bargaining and trade-offs in Bosnia, but really that permeates the society, and that Bosnia is prepared to join an alliance that will bring in, hopefully, it has its neighbor Croatia, its neighbor Serbia, Montenegro, and we'll continue to strengthen our relationship with Serbia. There's no reason Bosnia shouldn't be part of that equation, but it's not presenting a very compelling case just yet.
Exactly, you mentioned that one important country, that's Serbia. Serbia has a huge influence in part of Bosnia and Herzegovina called RS, and also we know that Russia is trying to influence RS through Serbia and through their own contacts. But is there a case which can show up to Bosnia and Serbs in Bosnia that the side of NATO is better, more secure, or more offering than a side where is Russia?
Well, first of all, let me be clear that there's a huge difference between NATO and the old days of the Warsaw Pact. NATO is an alliance of choice. It's an alliance of attraction. Countries decide that they want to be part of this organization. There are very few people in Washington or Berlin or London or Paris that are pushing to bring more countries in. In fact, as you know, there's some skepticism that whether we should be welcoming more countries into our club. So the first thing to remember is this is a demand-driven alliance. So Bosnia, the government, and the people of Bosnia have to make clear this is what they want and it's their aspiration. And we appreciate the signals from the government as it's trying to begin a membership action plan process with the alliance. At the same time, I would just underscore that don't underestimate how strong the NATO-Serbia relationship is. And I think some in Bosnia will be surprised as they stagnate in their work towards building a relationship with the alliance. They'll look up one day and see how far advanced Serbia has gotten in building a really constructive relationship with the United States and with NATO itself in particular. The role of Russia, I would say, has been unfortunate because we've seen messages coming from Moscow which really are different from many years ago, where before Moscow didn't have much to say as countries of the Balkans pursued their path towards Europe, whether that be the European Union or NATO itself. And that's now changed. That's now changed, and we hear unfortunate voices in Moscow and the Kremlin in particular saying that it would be provocative for countries in the region to form a closer relationship with the alliance. I think that's, in my view, that's intimidation, that's coercion, that's an effort to tell countries that they don't really have a right to choose their own future. And I'd rather leave that decision with the people of the region themselves to decide and with the governments themselves. We will have an open hand within the alliance. We won't let a Russian policy block our decisions, as we've shown through the acceptance of Montenegro. But at the end of the day, it's going to be driven by the hard work that takes place within Bosnia itself.
NATO is going to hold another summit soon in Warsaw, and that summit will also have a huge discussions when it comes to entire security situation in the world, especially when it comes to Middle East region. And we know that recently Russia and Turkey had a bickering there over Syria. But when you look from Atlantic Council, what is the situation at the moment at the Middle East, and what we can expect to happen when we know that Russia is trying to also put their influence there and make the entire situation much more complex than it is at the moment?
That's right. Well, first of all, let me say that I'm headed from Sarajevo to Warsaw, where we'll be joining the NATO summit deliberations there. And we're really looking forward to that. And I think one of the important messages, even as the alliance is really focused on its own defense and ensuring the collective defense of its allies, particularly with the bolstering of its presence in Europe's east, it has accepted the idea that the alliance can't be secure if its neighbors are in turmoil. And so one of the themes coming out of Warsaw will be how does NATO project stability both east into countries like Ukraine and Georgia, but also south into the Middle East. This is where I think NATO can offer more in terms of defense capacity building and training to help countries like Tunisia develop their capacity to take care of their own problems at home, to stand by Libya as NATO and the EU work together to ensure that the transitional government in Libya can actually ensure that that country succeeds and does not become a breeding ground for terrorism or a source of further migration. We have a NATO operation in the Aegean that is helping to advance coordination between Greece and Turkey on the migration issue. But you're absolutely right. There's going to be a major challenge still coming from what is really the strains and pressures on nation states in the Middle East as we see nation states dissolve. And the battleground, first and foremost, is the swath of territory from Syria into Iraq that ISIL occupies. Russia has been playing a very mixed and often, frankly, unhelpful role. Mr. Putin, with much fanfare, declared that he was going into Syria to fight ISIS. That's proven to not be the case. We've seen that the Russians have spent more of their time bolstering the Assad regime and attacking those opposition groups that the United States and its allies have supported, and doing much less in terms of the fight against ISIS. So the United States is talking to Russia right now about how to change that, how to focus on a different dynamic. But I have to say one of my biggest concerns is the lack of a clear transatlantic strategy, lack of a clear Western strategy. After the United Kingdom failed to have its vote to move forward with the use of force in Syria, and then President Obama decided to back away from the red line of acting in Syria as well, we've seen even a greater deterioration in the situation.
We know that the European Union is going through one of the worst crises since its founding, and we know that it's going to have impact on all aspects of life. But do you expect that it's going to have any kind of impact on NATO and relations inside the NATO?
Well, first of all, I think the decision of the British people to decide to leave the European Union, it's a blow to European unity and even American interests in Europe. But we have to respect the democratic process, the democratic outcome. What it does do is I think it makes the role of NATO even more important, and frankly the role of the United States in Europe even more important. Historically, the United States has been a very strong supporter of NATO, of European integration, because when we were not a European power, when we tried to withdraw from this continent, we saw the consequences were pretty bad, and we had to send American forces back to fight in World War II. Nobody wants to even contemplate a Europe where that scale of violence is possible, and that's what the story of the European Union was. So now that as the EU really thinks through and goes through an existential challenge to its future, I think it puts even a more important responsibility on the shoulders of the alliance to show that the alliance is strong, that it's coherent, it's unified, that it's organized, and it's prepared to not only hold Europe together, to resist the challenges that it's facing from Mr. Putin's Russia today, or the instability in the North Africa and the Middle East.
We have another situation which is at the moment playing inside the United States, and that's elections in the States. But let's talk hypothetical, doesn't matter who wins. Can we expect that in the future United States will keep that alliance with Europe, and that's a special status with Europe when it comes to security and integration and cooperation, and especially when it comes to this let's say, especially challenging part of Europe in the Western Balkans and the former Warsaw Bloc?
So I answer that with a pretty convincing yes. I think that will be the case, that NATO will remain essential and important to the United States, and the United States will remain the leader of the alliance. That said, there is a healthy and vibrant political debate in the United States. You've heard from President Obama expressing concern about free riders among allies that don't invest enough in their own defense, to the outrageous comments from Donald Trump suggesting that the alliance itself might be obsolete. Well, I think that's completely ridiculous. I think what is true is that they've really provoked an important conversation about how we keep our alliance strong and how European members of the alliance actually meet their own responsibilities to security here on the continent. And it's right for American taxpayers to expect Europeans to invest in their own defense, just as Americans do. Part of what remains really important is the unfinished business that we've taken together to undertake, and that certainly is the case here in the Western Balkans. We have seen a stagnation of advancing of Euro-Atlantic integration. I'm delighted that Montenegro will be entering the alliance, but I'm not delighted that we see a political impasse with Macedonia, that we see stagnation here in Bosnia, that we see real uncertainty looming in Kosovo or Serbia for that matter. We at the Atlantic Council think it's important that we reanimate a sense of a vision and a strategy to help promote this sense of completing the integration of the Western Balkans into the great European project. So we're going to be undertaking a major new effort at the Atlantic Council, working with partners in the region, working with Europeans and Americans and Canadians on can we reanimate that sense of political will and commitment to not just watch this region and be stuck, but really get invested in helping to it move forward more decisively. At the end of the day, what happens on the ground here in Bosnia will be one of the most important factors. It can't happen all from outside, but I think the United States and its European allies have a lot to do to advance that, and I hope we can play a modest role in pushing this idea forward.